Live! We're live!
Woohoo!
Hi, everyone! Whoop, whoop. Thank you so much for joining our Hangouts Live, a Q&A Google Analytics session with Annie Cushing. I'm going to cover a few homekeeping things before we get started. The first and most important option, I would say, is that if you want to ask any questions throughout the course of this Hangout, first of all, we just shared a link on Twitter if you want to join in and share your screen and ask questions live after we finish the ones that people submitted this past week. You can also, as a viewer, go into the little dotted 4 dots in the corner there and open up the Q&A option and ask questions there. If you join as a moderator, you can open up the Q&A option in your left-hand toolbar to ask questions there. You can also tweet at us on Twitter with the hashtag GAHangout, and we will also field those questions in for replies. So there are many ways to get our attention. There's also a chat room. Any way you want to get a hold of us, we just want to answer your questions and be as helpful as possible. So a few other things. This Hangout is going to be recorded and posted to the Annielytics YouTube channel, so you will be able to get a recording and a wrap-up post after this is finished. You can share screen when you're joining. You can go ahead and talk, but I just ask you to wait until we finish the questions that have been submitted for this week, and to just mute yourself when you first hop into this VIP area where you can see our faces and we can see yours. Cool. So I think that's pretty much it. The last thing is that Annie is going to share links during the presentation, and they're going to show up in the Showcase app. So if you're a viewer, if you're just joining this off of the Google Plus page, you can view it there. And if you are in the moderator or VIP mode where you can see your screen and interact a little bit more, you can also view it there. It says Showcase, and it has 3 little yellow tags. So the last thing about asking questions, if you're a viewer, you do have to be signed into a Google account to ask questions through the Q&A. So just be aware of that. Again, you have all these other options through the chat room, through Twitter, and all those other messaging options to ask the questions. So without further ado, we're going to check out the questions that people have asked this past week. Off to you.
Okay, thanks, Tori. Thank you for getting us kicked off. There's a lot of administrative finesse I've discovered that goes into these Hangouts, and Tori has been spearheading all of that, and you've done a fantastic job. And I'm not biased at all just because she's my daughter, whatever. Anyway, let me go ahead and share my screen here. See? Okay, excuse me. And the first question we had, this was a 2-part question. The person said, we have a blog on our site and I need to find out a couple things. First of all, did any blog post lead directly to a contact us conversion from that post and or assist in a conversion somewhere on our main site? We do have goals set up for our contact us pages, and CTA, which is calls to action forms throughout our main site. Our individual posts do not have CTA, but the contact us button is in the header navigation. So, all right, thick and chewy cookie. Let me jump in first of all to say absolutely you can track that. But one thing that, and I really always try to emphasize this, is that anytime you want to associate conversions with a URL, you have to use the landing page dimension, which is completely different from the page dimension. So the page dimension is the dimension that drives the all pages report, and you can always see the dimension here in this first column. So this is the page dimension, and this includes every page that was hit in a total session. So you might look at 5 different pages in a session, and that this page dimension is going to capture all 5 of those. However, you're not going to see conversion data in this report for the reason that no one page gets the credit for the conversion. It took all 5 pages or 3 pages or however many pages there were in a session you know, massaging, introducing someone to your brand, all of these different things. And then finally, you kind of nudge them along. It might be their 6th or 7th visit before they do anything that you hope that they'll do when they visit your site. And then they convert. The closest thing that you'll have in terms of conversion data in the all pages report or any custom report that you use the page dimension for is this page value metric. So what page value does is if someone looks at 5 different pages and they spend a total of $500, each of those pages gets $100 credit. And so that's the closest thing we have, but you're not going to see like goal conversion data or anything like that. Anytime you want to see goal conversion or e-commerce data, you have to use the landing page dimension. And the reason that the landing page dimension includes conversion data is that it's just one more characteristic of the entire session, just like what browser did the person use, what city did the visitor come from, what source did the visitor come from, did he or she come from Google or Twitter or Reddit or, you know, a competitor site, where did this person come from? Landing page is one more characteristic of the entire session. So anytime you need conversion data associated with a URL, you have to use the landing pages or landing page dimension, or you can go to the landing pages report. Alternatively, if you just wanted to see the landing pages of any one particular channel, you could go up here to the channels report, which is under acquisition all traffic channels, drill down on a particular channel, and then from there you can switch the primary dimension to landing page. And now instead of looking at all of my landing pages, now I'm only looking at my organic landing pages. Obviously, if I had chosen social, I would just be looking at my social landing pages and so on and so forth. So that's important to understand these little nuances here. So going down to my landing pages here, these are all the landing pages for my site. Now what I can do is I can change the conversion to, here it's using e-commerce, but I could change this to any one of my conversions, and I also have a contact submission conversion. And so now you'll see, put the time period I've selected. I've had 53 people fill out my contact form. No wonder I can never get through my inbox in any given day. But then I can see, well, which URLs, which landing pages drove those conversions. If I wanted to see like which page typically came right before that conversion, then I can use a different report for that. I can actually, I never use this, but you could go to the reverse goal path. And here you see your completion, your goal completion URLs, and then the URL that came right before it, the URL that came 2 steps before that, and so on and so forth. And I can change the goal here. So, so yeah, that's the answer to the first question. The part 2, we place hyperlink anchor text in each blog post. How can we tell if it has been clicked? All right, so here's my opinion on this. Obviously, if you want to know if the URL has been clicked, one of the best ways to do that is with event tracking. A very easy way to set that up is in Google Tag Manager, because then you can apply rules like if the URL contains your blog subdirectory and this, and the source contains your site, so you can set up all these rules, then go ahead and add this event to that URL. So that's obviously going to be a lot easier than doing all of this manually. However, one thing to keep in mind, one of the issues that I see with event tracking frequently when I'm doing analytics audits is that people will set up all these events and then they become like orphaned data, where they set it up They may care about it for a few days, a few weeks, maybe even a few months if we're being really, really generous. But then after that, no one cares about it. But every event you set up on your site creates a little bit of lag, you know, and so you want to be really careful when you're deciding what events you set up and prioritize in your site. Because if you, like for example, I've seen this somewhat frequently where someone will set up event tracking on every link in their top navigation because they want to know which links in their navigation are getting the most clicks. The problem is every time someone uses your nav bar, you're firing off events, and that's creating lag on the site, and then those reports frequently just never see the light of day. So so that's my caveat there, but absolutely I would, once again, I would use Google Tag Manager to simplify this process, because Google Tag Manager makes it very easy to just grab like the anchor text, you know, and use that as the label, you know, things like that. So definitely, if you're going to create links like this kind of en masse, then I would look for ways to do it programmatically. But if you did set that up, then where you would go to find that would be your events report. Let's go here. Excuse me. And your top events. I haven't been running events on my site for a while, but if I take this back to, I'll say 11/1/2015, because I had some events then, I believe. Yeah. So then you would click on the event category, drill down to the action. You can always change the primary dimension, but this is where you're going to find that data. So. All right, moving on to the next question. Oh, and if I get through all of these questions before the hour is up, then we'll open it up to any questions that you guys have, which Tori may have mentioned. All right, question number 2. I don't fully understand segments and how I can use them, and in what scenario they are to be used. So this is a really good question. I'm really glad someone asked this question. I didn't ask it, just, you know. But advanced segments they're kind of a mixed bag. So they can be really powerful. Let me just, spoiler alert this. If you are managing a very large site, forget about it. Because advanced segments are one of those things that creates an issue called sampling. So let me just spend a couple minutes explaining what that is, because you need to understand sampling to understand the limitations that you face when you use a segment. So in sampling, what happens is Google gives you 500,000 sessions. And within a particular time period that you have selected, you have 500,000 sessions. And if you stay under 500,000 sessions, you'll get all of your data. You'll be able to create custom reports. You'll be able to reprocess data. And Google's like, that's fine. You surpass 500,000 sessions, and Google is going to say, all right, hold up. Now you're getting a little greedy. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 500,000 sessions, and we're going to extrapolate those sessions out to however many sessions you actually have. So let's say for the time period you have selected, you have 2 million sessions. Well, then you're looking at about a quarter of your total data. And so then Google's going to take that 500,000 sessions and extrapolate that out to 100,000. Now, there's a lot of math and a lot of science that goes behind that. Obviously, I'm simplifying it. But what you want to do before you even decide if you're going to use an advanced segment is go to either your audience overview report or your acquisition overview report and look at this number here. So this is the total number of sessions. Now this is just, my tiny little blog. So very, very rarely is sampling ever an issue for me. But if I get to 500,000 sessions, then I need to either reduce my time frame that I have selected. So I have 2 months selected here. I either need to reduce that time frame, or I need to just use one of the standard reports, because the standard reports aren't subject to sampling. So you can take any one of these standard reports and look at an entire year's worth of data, and you're not going to get sampling. And for some of them, you can even change the primary dimension. So we did that just in my last example. When I talk about primary dimension, I'm talking about taking this, like the primary dimension of the default report, and changing it to something else. So if I change this to source medium, for a lot of the reports, you're still not going to get sampling. But for some of them, you do. So go figure. Your mileage may vary. And I haven't figured out what exactly is the difference. I think it might be if you choose the standard, the primary dimension from an other dropdown. I think that's when you get sampling, but I haven't really tested that out to find out for sure. So then, and one thing to also be aware of is that, okay, so as I mentioned, you get 500,000 sessions, but Google, I think it was a couple years ago, started doing this thing where at 250,000 sessions, you actually start getting sampling, and then you'll get a little, I can't show you an example because I can't pull up a client's Google Analytics account. I can't hide the client name, but you'll see this little icon that looks like a grid icon with like 9 little squares, and you actually have to click on that and take that that slider and drag it all the way to the right, because I think your options are, process faster or, accuracy or something like that. And, that's your way of saying, no, Google, it's fine. You can take as long as you need. I need my full 500,000 sessions. So always be looking for that little icon. It is always also accompanied by a yellow flag that lets you know how many sessions Google is actually using and what percentage that is of your total sessions. So the rule of thumb that I use, I hate that term, I need to come up with a better one, but the guiding principle, I'll just say, is I have about as much confidence as that percentage. So if I see that there's 80% sampling after I've moved that slider all the way to the right, I'm like, yeah, okay, better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. But if I see something like 20%, 5%, 2%, I've even seen as little as, point, whatever percent, that's basically junk data. I mean, it would be just as predictive to take spaghetti, throw it against the wall, and there you go. There's your GA account. So at that point, you really just need to either upgrade to premium. If you have that many visitors visiting your site, you could probably afford it. Alternatively, you need to use a tool like Annielytics, Canvas, or something like that or your own database that allows you to use the API and just store the data that you want to store and process that. So, store it on a daily basis or twice a day so that you can then hit that database and query that database instead of querying Google Analytics, and then that data is not going to be sampled. Okay, so having said all of that about sampling, you need to understand that segments do cause sampling. So if you are over that 500,000 sessions, and that's after you've moved the slider all the way to the right. And keep in mind, when you move that slider all the way to the right, it's going to double the number of sessions that Google is using. So if you, before you move it to the right, if you see that in that flag it says Google's using 53% of your sessions, obviously when you slide that all the way to the right, you're not going to have sampling, because now when you double that, 106 is greater than 100%. So there's not going to be any sampling. But if you still have, if you're over that 500,000 mark, then you're going to have sampling when you use an advanced segment, or if you use a custom report or do any kind of customization. And like I said, even sometimes change the primary dimension in a standard report. All of these things can create sampling. So having said all that, the value of segments is that it allows you to look at a particular, let's say, subset of your traffic across multiple reports. So that's very, very valuable, because when I'm looking, if I'm just looking at a single report and I need to filter, I'm not going to use advanced segments, because I have almost like data related PTSD. I hate to see that sampling flag. So I'm constantly, I have kind of well-worn paths to avoid anything that could trigger sampling. And one of the things that I do to avoid that is I'll use a report filter. So if I use, and this is a report filter here, in any of your standard reports except these overview reports. So basically any report that has a table here, you're going to have these report filters. And you can get really sophisticated with the amount of filtering you can do, especially if you click on advanced. And if you're familiar with regex, you always have this regex option. I wish they would take the P out. It looks so nerdy. But you can really, really filter a single report using a report filter without triggering sampling. However, if you wanted to then apply that filter to another report, you would have to recreate that filter for every report that you want to look at, which can get annoying. Oh, and by the way, if you don't know what regular expressions is, what cool kids call regex, I have a guide that really breaks it down into very, very simple steps. And I will take a quick second and drop this into the showcase. I think that's where I'm supposed to. And here we go. I highly recommend this, because I share, like, I basically take you by the hand, and I only share the regex that's actually relevant to Google Analytics. Someone is unmuted, but anyway, so that's the point there about regex. Having said all that, so if you want to take a segment of your overall visitors or sessions or anything like that and apply them across multiple reports, then report filters really aren't your best option. Then you really want to use an advanced segment. So an example of this would be, let's say, like my site is an e-commerce site, because I sell a number of different resources. If you want to check them out, just go to Annielytics.com/resources, and you can see some of them. But if I just wanted to look at only the traffic that resulted in a transaction, then I could go in here, and when you click on advanced segments, in fact, let me back up a little bit. In any report that you're in, you have this option to add a segment. By clicking on that, you're going to get into this interface here that's just at the, it's just at the top of your report, so you don't lose your place wherever you are. And the default option is all. So this is going to include all of my custom segments, plus the ones that come out of the box inside Google Analytics. So if I just want to see those, I can just click on System. And System has this one that I really like, and it has two, and it's important to understand the difference. So one is sessions with conversions. I don't want that, because I very rarely ever want to see goal conversions mixed in with my transactions. I usually want to see those separately. So I would choose sessions with transactions. Now I can, and then I click Apply. Now, any report that I look at inside of Google Analytics is only going to show me those sessions with transactions. And I can even remove the all users so that it's not just an orange bar at the bottom. Now, I can see of everyone who ultimately did what I dream of visitors doing, how many of those came from direct, how many of those came from organic, how many of them came from my Google Docs, how many came from social, affiliate, and referral for the time period I have selected. And similarly, any report that I look at, like if I looked at my technology report, I could see which operating system they most commonly come from. I'm surprised that anyone on iOS converts. Woohoo, good for you. I can see what browser. I can see a breakdown of, you know, are they coming from desktop, mobile, or tablet? But any report I look at, I'm only seeing the creme de la creme of my visitors for this time period. So that's where the real value comes in with advanced segments, because you can get really, really granular in building out these segments. I also use segments a lot when I'm doing any kind of forensic research. So for example, every time organic traffic goes missing from Google Analytics, like, you know, back when it was missing from iOS, all organic traffic was showing up as direct traffic. I would create advanced segments that got as specific as you had to be on an iOS device, you had to be using Safari as your browser, and you had to come from Google Organic. And I would combine all of those in a single segment and then apply that across all of my reports, or whatever reports I needed to look at. So I would apply that segment to my transaction reports or my goal conversions reports. And so I won't go into how to actually build that out, save to say you just click this new segment button, and then you have basically any metric or dimension inside of Google Analytics is at your disposal to build out really sophisticated segments with sophisticated conditions, and you can always use regex, which is also helpful. So here's where, if you want to build out a completely custom one, here's where you would do that. You would just go into advanced conditions and, you know, decide, do I want to segment sessions or users? Users are going to span multiple sessions potentially. Do I want to include or exclude? And then just keep choosing or and until you have everything that you want. Okay? All right. So moving on from that. Whoops. Okay, social share buttons. This was also a two-part question. We have used Tag Manager and set up events on each of our social share buttons, which are placed on our blog posts and on specific pages of our website. I believe we find how many shares under behavior events overview. Would like confirmation on that. Yes, that is where you find it. And again, you would just go down to behavior, events. I usually go right to top events, but close enough. Let's see, whoops. But where do we find which blog post or site content was actually shared? Okay, so this is where it starts getting a little dicey. Let me once again go back to a time where I had more events tracking on my site. So if I go to my top events, oops, let me cancel out of this. Oh, one caveat, anytime you're using an advanced segment, and I have made this mistake so many times, when you're finished using that segment, it's very important to make sure you click in that upper right-hand corner and release that segment. Otherwise, you're going to move on to your next report, and you're only going to be looking at a portion of your traffic. Okay, so when I go into a segment here, I'm sorry, not a segment, an event, switching gears here. I'm going to, by default, land on this event category dimension. I can click and drill down to the particular action. The thing that I like about getting to this report is that now I have this drop down where I can change the primary dimension to something other than category action or event label. I don't know why you can't in the first report, but you don't have that option. And I don't like applying a secondary dimension unless I absolutely have to, because then when you export this, the only way to really process that data is with a pivot table. And if you aren't familiar with pivot tables or haven't worked with them, seriously, just search Annie Cushing pivot tables. I have a video where I once again talk you through the entire process and give you the instructions on Mac or PC for how to build and really rock pivot tables. So going back to that other report, now, and this is something that it seems like a lot of people don't know because it comes up in analytics audits that I do. A lot of times what people will do is for the event label, they will, instead of pulling an intuitive label that they actually create, they'll pull in the URL that the event fired on. The problem with that is that Google Analytics already gives you that. If you go to other and you change the dimension to page, this is going to give you a breakdown of all of the pages that that particular event fired on. I can't get other things out of my head right now, apparently. So what I recommend doing is going back, and in fact, if you wanted to run this report, you would actually have to, if you're not drilling down to, all right, let me back up. If you're drilling down to one particular event, then you can just change the primary dimension, export that, bring that into your database via the API, whatever, you're off to the races. If you need this information for multiple events, then what I recommend doing is creating this secondary dimension where I put in page. Now we have 2 dimensions, and these are all metrics here. And then we see the category, or I could change the primary dimension to action or label, and the actual page that it fired on. So it just depends how granular your data needs are, but those are the different ways that you can approach that. Now, for part 2, he asked, or he or she asked, and then can we reverse engineer that and find which shared piece of content might have come back and resulted in a conversion, all the while seeing which social platform it was shared to and or came back from to lead to a conversion. Okay, so this takes us back to what I talked about in the beginning of the Hangout. If you want any conversion data, you cannot use this page dimension. And it just worked out perfectly that this question followed the other one. If it hadn't, I just would have answered the other one first because it's a natural segue. So because you can't associate conversions with a page, you would actually need to run a separate report where you look at the landing page and then the conversions associated with those landing pages, and using a secondary dimension, since you also want to know social network, using a secondary dimension of social network, which you'll notice is the dimension that fuels a couple of different reports. If you're not familiar with the social reports, I mean, they are a mixed bag. There are lots of weird little nuances, really twitchy little characters. So I did do a blog post recently on where I just deconstructed the social reports, and I did a video walkthrough. It's pretty extensive, but I go step by step through all of the different social reports and the strengths and drawbacks of each of them. My favorite is to go to the channels report and click on social. And then you'll see that the dimension that fuels this report is the social network dimension. The thing I like about the social network dimension is that it takes all of those individual sources. So the individual sources for Facebook include facebook.com, m.facebook.com, l.facebook.com, lm.facebook.com. So you don't want to use something like source or source medium for really any, in my opinion, any social reports, because you are going to be pulling these URLs from, you know, the 4 corners of the earth. I definitely recommend using the social dimension, social network dimension instead. It's also what is used in the network referrals report, I believe. Yeah, social network. But I don't like this report nearly as much, and there's no conversion data associated with it. So we'll go back for some reason. I don't understand why. So what we can do here is we could apply a secondary dimension of landing page, because we have conversion data here. So now because the person said, all the while seeing which social platform it was shared to, that's going to be this, and here is your landing page. Now, obviously, you're going to need to export this, or bring it into a database and query it. If you export it to Excel, you're going to need to use a pivot table to be able to drill down. Otherwise, this is a pretty nasty table here. So that's what I would recommend there. I would actually recommend most going in here and creating a new custom report, and just calling it, I'll just call it landing page test for now. And then you would set your metrics here, whatever is important to you. So I'd select sessions. And if I wanted to know my overall goal completions, I would put that. If I wanted to know, let's say, revenue, I would put that. Where is it? Here we go. And then I would change this from Explorer to flat table. That's going to put my dimensions side by side. And I have a report on I have a blog post on flat tables and their value somewhere on my site. But here I would put social network and then landing page. And it just depends which is most important to you. Do you want to primarily see the social network and then kind of drill down to see the landing page when it's in Excel or wherever you ultimately put it? Or do you want to look at the landing pages and drill down to see social network? Really doesn't matter. You just need them side by side if you need to export the report. If you just want to look at it inside of Google Analytics, I like the Explorer option better, because that works more like the other Google Analytics report, where you click on something and you drill down to the next option. And it even looks different, because you see here, social network is clearly at the top of the stack, and then landing page. And if I wanted to move these around, I could just click and drag like this. But I would want a flat table. I could even apply a filter. Like if I only cared about social, I could say, which obviously I think this person does, you could change this to social. I very, very rarely ever use exact. In this case, the default channel grouping, which is the dimension that fuels the ever amazing channels report, is only going to match social. So that's fine. But usually I'll use regex, even if I don't have any regex in there, just to make it so it's not case sensitive. But I know that the default channel grouping uses capital letters, so it's fine. And then I would just save this. Then you can export this and bring it into Excel and go at it. Okay. May you please run through examples of in which reports you can view content grouping data? Yes, so basically, obviously first you need to have content grouping set up on your site. I do, but basically any of your content reports. So if I come in here to all pages, I'll be able to see my content groups here, and I can, instead of looking at all of my content, I can just look at one of these content groups. But even for some of them, like there might be like an overview report. You usually can't change the primary dimension for an overview report. And I think there was one, I think it might have been content drill down. Yeah, like you don't have an option to, let me see. Yeah, you don't have an option here to change the primary dimension between the two here. So you can always kind of get around that by selecting a secondary dimension. So I can start to type in content group, and here are going to be all of my content groups. So, all right, that one was pretty easy. A lot of our websites have numerous UA codes on them, Universal Analytics codes. We also have some UA codes still formatted as traditional, as well as other UA codes as universal. Someone's a pack rat. We know not to have the same UA code in both the traditional and universal slits. I think they meant slots, I don't know. But what are the repercussions of having multiple UA codes on a single site. And I actually think the part 2, is that, whoops, where was I? I'm going to hit the part 2 at the same time. Where was it? Also, what happened different Google Tag Manager IDs on the same website. And I wanted to include that along with it because my friend Simo Ahava, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, he has a really good blog post on this, which I will share in the showcase. That basically, yes, you can have multiple Google Tag Manager IDs or containers on a single page, but it's not recommended. Usually, it's because of poor planning on the site's part. But if you absolutely can't get around it, or you can't get anyone to budge on it, then he gives a lot of advice and guidance on how to best do that. Okay. I really need a great resource for understanding GA debug in developer tools. Any resources you'd recommend? Absolutely. The main one that I use religiously is Google Analytics Debugger. I'll drop that in here. There we go. I really like the Google Analytics Debugger because, and this is what it looks like. And when it's on, you'll see this red on here. And any page that you're looking at that's running Google Analytics OBS, and I'll just use my own as an example, you can right-click anywhere on the page if you're in Chrome and choose Inspect. I'm on a Mac, so I just choose Command-Option-J. But then if you go into the console here, you'll see all of your Google Analytics information, which is really, really helpful. When I'm, for example, debugging, let's say, like if the site needs cross-domain tracking set up, or if the cross-domain tracking is set up properly, I use this client ID a dimension a lot, or it's not a dimension, it's whatever. But I use this quite a bit because if this updates when I move from one page to another, then I know, okay, well, the cookie is crashing to the ground and crumbling when I move from one page on one site to, let's say, a partner site where they at least tried to set up cross-domain tracking. So there's a lot of information in here that you can use. Another option is a Tag Assistant. I've used this quite a bit. It was specifically created for Google Tag Manager, but can also be used for Google Analytics. Let me drop the link to that. Another great, great tool. Another one is GA Checker. You just go to gachecker.com. This is actually, like, if you want to think about it, like Screaming Frog for Google Analytics. There's quite a bit that you can do with this. You run a crawl of your site, and you can check for all of these different things. I use Screaming Frog to do all of these tasks as well. But then also, I did a blog post not too long ago on how to use the real-time reports inside of Google Analytics. And I do quite a bit of debugging just using the real-time reports. Then it can be a little tricky if you're in a large city, and especially if it's a larger site. So I'm in Philadelphia, and I actually live inside Philadelphia. And so if I'm on a site, a large site, there might be 20, 30, 100 people from Philadelphia on the site, depending on the site. And so then I share some tricks for how to isolate yourself. And then once you have yourself isolated, then anything you do on that site, well, just about anything, I mean, obviously lots of parameters, you'll be able to see inside of your real-time reports. So it's everything I use. And I think we got to the bottom. All right, so any questions about anything I talked about, or are there any questions for the Hangout?
So it looks like we didn't have any confusion with what you guys are talking about. We had some chatter about how much we love the resource from Simo Havana.
Yeah,
that last blog post. Yeah, somebody was like, "Oh, I love that. I love that." They said that you're both brilliant in the industry. So compliments.
Simo is amazing. I love that guy, and he's very helpful too. So he has that winning combination of being smart, but also very approachable. I've asked him questions, and like instead of just answering my question, like he'll send me the code that I can just drop on the site and stuff. So yeah, he's a beast.
That is so great. Yeah, I'm gonna be geeking out on his stuff later.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Great.
Okay. So were there any other questions, or are there any questions that I can answer? If not, we can hop out of here early.
I haven't seen through the Q&A or on Twitter, mostly just people chatting about how great the resources are. So it looks like it was mostly the pre-submitted questions this week.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, it was a pleasure having you all. And please, Tori, did you mention the landing page that we created just for these Hangouts?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So I actually didn't mention it before, but yes, I will show you guys right here. If you go to annielytics.com/annielyticsonair, there are a few dashes in between those. So annielytics-on-air. Then we have this landing page here for you with a tutorial on how to interact with these Hangouts on air.
Yeah, because they are not the most intuitive things.
Yeah, they really aren't. So if you had any confusion with how to ask questions today or hop in the chat room or anything like that, I walk you through the whole process here. And then we also have our form where you can submit questions, and you can also RSVP to the Google Plus event and get notifications when we get close to the next event, which will be next month.
Yeah, so this will just be a persistent landing page that you can access at any time. I mean, as long as there's a need, I will continue to offer these on a monthly basis. And so you'll always be able to just go to that page to get information. And for social shares and stuff, we're just going to start sending the traffic to that page so that you can get all of those questions answered and submit your questions right there on the page. Tori did a fantastic job pulling that together, because I was like, you know what, it's just I think the most stressful thing about Hangouts, having joined them, been a participant but not running them, and now running them, is that there are just so many like knobs that you're like, you know, it's really easy to be like, okay, I'm on the Google Plus page. Now what? What do I click on? What do I do? How do I get in? And so anyway, so I asked her if she would just pull together a video and really kind of walk people through. So it's not a long video. It didn't need to be a long video, but it's very helpful in terms of kind of giving you an overview for any Google Hangouts, not just the Annielytics Hangouts. So fantastic job, honey.
Yeah.
Oh, and she's my daughter. That's why I don't normally call employees honey. Maybe problematic.
Although it's very endearing, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure. All right.
Yeah, so the video is under 6 minutes. You can just watch it really quickly, and then it'll hopefully clear up any confusion. But if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me at Tori Cushing on Twitter, or obviously at Annie Cushing. You've probably talked to her before.
Yeah, just don't call her honey.
Yeah, just don't call me honey. Only mom can do that.
Anyway,
yeah.
Thank you for joining, guys, and we'll see you again next month.
Thank you.